Okay, so welcome. Thanks for coming. This is our monthly Spokane DevOps meetup, aka or Lunch and Learn, same thing. IntelliTect hosts a couple of other meetups as well. Spokane.net Users Group, which meets occasionally, and the Spokane Python User Group, which meets monthly. Way to go, Joseph. Or way to go, Joe. So IntelliTect is where we're at, and it was sponsoring this meetup. We do a lot of software solution architecture, cloud architecture, software design, and we love to learn, which is one of the reasons we do things like meetups, so we can learn about tech. No better way to learn about tech than to do a meetup on it. So follow us on the socials, both Facebook, Twitter, or X. Reminds me of a ZZ Top song, but most of you are probably, it's beyond your generationals across generations. ZZ Top. Anybody know who ZZ Top is?
You got some good beards.
The guy with the beards. Well, one of them's dead, so there's only one beard left.
Yeah.
So
Kind of happens,
it happens. Yeah, you get old, But anyway, we'll leave that. And then also YouTube. If we do a reasonable job on the presentation today and I don't show any proprietary information from our customers, this video has a chance of getting up to YouTube. Okay, so that's the intro stuff. Let me get to Monitor. I'm Phil. My title is CTO at IntelliTect. I've got a long history of doing stuff. Architecture, software development, managing teams, Scrum, DevOps, I don't know, all kinds of stuff. I'm sure I've forgotten a few things, but and one of the things that I've been doing lately, working with the cohort here at IntelliTect, as well as Jenny, Grant, and Meg, to teach this cohort AZ-204, or the material needed for the Azure exam AZ-204 from Microsoft. A key component of that is Azure Monitor. So I figured, rather than dive into GitHub rule sets, which we'll do next month, I figured now was a good time before we all take the test in the coming weeks to actually dive into something more topical for us anyway, which is Azure Monitor.
Hey, Phil. There's a request for you to share your slides in the team meeting.
Thank you. Really appreciate you keeping an eye on that. I'm going to share the screen, make it easy. You didn't really miss anything yet. There are some pretty pictures earlier, but we won't get back over. You'll see them on the recording. Azure Monitor is what we're going to talk about. And what I wanted to do today was just the introduction, review some of the updates to the service that have taken place over the last few years. I've been around a while, working with Azure pretty much since the early days. And as with a lot of the services, a number of things have happened over the years. Microsoft has invested a lot in all the services and the entire platform, and specifically in Azure Monitor. And from my point of view, I thought it was a good idea to take a step back and just look at the Monitor from an overview point of view, and we'll take a look at what some of the capabilities are of Monitor. It's something that it's a service you see. If you're deploying services to Azure, you will interact with it. A lot of times what we end up doing is just touching a little bit without really understanding what the full service does. Understanding what the full service does is difficult because Microsoft has a team that just keeps cranking out features and adding stuff, and it makes it difficult to keep up. So hopefully that makes sense from a rationale point of view and topic point of view. So what I wanted to cover today was the problem space. Why do I need it? Why do I care? What is it? A little bit of history and some overview. And as we go through the overview, we'll also walk through things, which will serve as sort of a demo. And then we may have a special demo at the end. I don't know. We'll see. see if we have time. An hour tends to go by quickly. So, why do we care about Azure Monitor? Well, it's in the name, it's Azure, and we want to monitor Azure. What's Azure doing? Azure Monitor is a monitoring system. We want to be able to monitor both the services that we put into Azure as well as the solutions that we add into Azure on top of services. Anything from a storage account to Event Hub to app services and et cetera. The quote here is what Azure Monitor does. It allows you to gain end-to-end observability of your application's infrastructure and network. So the key thing, if you've been in Azure a long time, the initial solutions were focused on applications or specific application services. The Azure Monitor moniker has really grown to include any Azure service, like any Azure service, including the subscriptions and including Azure Active Directory itself. A key, let's say, subset of this problem space is what's called Application Performance Management, or APM, which, again, as I just said, that's more focused on how your particular application is performing. There are a lot of solutions in the marketplace. Microsoft provides one in Azure, which is Azure Monitor. That is the default for Azure Monitor. If you're familiar with AWS, you know about CloudWatch, which is comparable service in AWS land. There's also many third parties out there. I put 3 down here that are, relatively popular and in use, but that is it's a long list. That's by no means the only ones that are out there. And I'm sure anybody who's done anything cloud related or even on-prem, there's some of these solutions actually started their days as on-prem solutions and they migrated to cloud and hosted services. You're going to be familiar with something that's comparable to Azure Monitor. Why do we use it? And it's interesting also, like Grafana is like a key integration point for Azure Monitor. So not only is Grafana sort of its own, people think of it more as a visualization tool, but it can actually capture logs and do some of the same things that Azure Monitor is doing. Azure Monitor can feed its data into Grafana. So there's a lot of this sort of hybrid scenarios that are out there as well. A couple of our customers, many of them will use either Datadog or Splunk. One in particular, they have a huge installation of Splunk, and they use Azure Monitor all over the place. They have a very big installation of Azure Monitor as well as Splunk. So they're feeding data from their monitor logs into Splunk. Splunk being they use that for cross-platform stuff, higher level security information, event management. So they're using Azure Monitor to sort of pre-filter, pre-aggregate, and then they're feeding that into Splunk. And I know that Johnny is familiar with a lot of these things and configuring every one of their Azure services to be able to monitor. We won't name the customer because, again, this is going to YouTube, though we could trash the whole video right here just by saying the customer name. But we spent a lot of time, building Terraform templates, and one of the key parts of the Terraform template, when you provisioned a resource, it automatically had diagnostic configuration, which we'll walk through a little bit later. That diagnostic configuration generated Azure Monitor logs, which ended up making their way into Splunk for this particular client. Why do we care about application performance management? I mean, ultimately, we're trying to respond to issues that occur in applications, because you put an application out there. If it's doing anything, sooner or later, it's going to encounter an issue. We want to be proactive about that. Services will have issues, and we want to be able to do this without having to, search through resources after the fact and open up log files in our favorite log processor to go search for things. We want to set up systems that are going to be proactive, and ultimately, what does that lead to? We spend less time tracking down errors. So we all have plenty of work to do. If we can spend a few less hours tracking down errors, then that's good for everybody. The thing to keep in mind is that we talk about DevOps a lot. This is a DevOps meetup after all. And monitoring is part of that full DevOps lifecycle. We often talk about monitoring. Oh yeah, we get logs and et cetera, et cetera. But we should generally treat that a bit more seriously, both when we're building the applications, but also when we're deploying and operating our applications or our solutions. Grab the logs, pull the data back, make sure that we're listening to events. The easy scenario is errors, failures. There's more interesting scenarios which might have to do with, hey, the site's getting hacked, or did my feature actually get used? Did it get used as often as I thought it was going to get used? Did it get used in the way I thought it was going to get used? Is there bugs in this feature that I just put in? So certainly we want to log that, we want to capture it. If you go all the way back to the beginning of plan and develop, plan, what am I going to care about when I deploy this thing, and develop, make sure that you have a solid logging strategy, and you have your logs in there day one, and then it makes operating your solution easy. So for those of you who are starting up solutions, hopefully you're thinking already about, I'm looking at you over there.
Yeah.
You have logging in place now, months before your solution goes, because at some point you're gonna start to collect those things. And ideally, you start to play with some of these things now, even in the first few iterations where, maybe it's just a hello world type screen, but hey, you can at least see, hey, this is up. I know how to monitor it. I know how to detect it. And I'm in a better position to put in useful logging in the application as I move forward. Make sense? This is an open forum. Feel free to throw questions out. Speed me up, slow me down. Usually I don't need any speeding up. Usually it's slowing down a bit. So I think we get it. We want to validate, we present a hypothesis. We think we need this feature. We think a bunch of people are going to use it. Great log. Put in logs, put in the appropriate metrics and monitoring, and then validate it at the end. Did the feature get used as often as you thought it was going to be used? Now, it could be as simple as a page that you add to your app, or it could be some feature. I don't know. Okay, so a bit of what is it? Azure Monitor. It's an Azure service, as we talked about. It will monitor Azure on-prem and other clouds. I think in reality, naturally, it's going to be doing most of its work monitoring Azure, but you can connect this to on-prem solutions. If you have a hybrid solution and you want to monitor, let's say, desktops that aren't running in Azure, but might be running an application, well, you can instrument those applications so that they actually report into Azure Monitor and get consolidated or aggregated or related metrics and logs. Azure Monitor is built into Azure. It's always available. Certain services, for example, Azure AD are always logging. You don't have to pre-configure AD to get logs, or subscription level events. These things are always getting logged, and you can just hook a query, which we'll talk about in a minute, to these events and see them. The part of the monitor we're collecting information. We're able to route it. We're able to do some transformation. There's some built-in inspection and analyzing, which we'll talk about. And then we can actually do alerts on what we're capturing, what we're logging. You'll see in Azure, if you go to a resource, we'll go there shortly. There's a monitor tab just about every place you look. What's in that monitor tab may vary based on what the resource is. So for example, in a resource group, I've got a snapshot up there of what the monitoring section of the left-hand nav looks like for a resource group. The app service has got a few more options. So.
And does it cost extra to enable that, or is it just sort of built in? You said it's kind of built in, so I would imagine it comes for free.
Yes, but Azure, you will pay if you use it at some point. there's always pain and you will pay. There's the two things that are true about developing for the cloud. And I think I may talk about that in a little bit. So there's two ways, and in fact, this is probably a good slide to talk about it a little bit. So first, a little history if you've been around Azure for a while, you'll see these terms today, but originally the way Microsoft talked about these services was as App Insights. Well, I think originally App Insights wasn't even a thing, but I'm going back to, the early days, 10 years ago. App Insights is really about metrics. Log Analytics is really about logging and consolidated view and common services around logging and analyzing your logs. Those have morphed and merged into Azure Monitor. So really the way Microsoft and Azure, we all think about this these days, is that App Insights and Log Analytics are features of Azure Monitor. Sometimes Azure Monitor and Log Analytics are used interchangeably. Yeah, I don't know. That's just the way it is. So Azure Monitor is included, because you're always paying for something unless you're on the free plan. Free is in free. But so the basics of Azure Monitor are included. App Insights you will pay if you ingest at a high enough frequency, like if you're generating a lot of App Insight data from a couple of different apps and you hit the threshold and you don't turn App Insights off because you have the option of, hey, if I hit the threshold, turn off monitoring, which I don't know that's the right way to go, but you have that option. And that you'll stop paying there. And then Log Analytics, there's a threshold as well with regards to how much data you capture and then how much volume of data you capture. And if you, for example, this customer that we have, they are generating a lot of data in Log Analytics, and I guarantee you they're spending lots of money to get these features. Now it's a big corporation, they got a lot of work to do. It makes sense that they would spend a lot of money. So and that they're getting value out of that data. If you're spending money and you're not getting value out of it, shut it off or turn it down. So that's really a key part of the whole story. So hope, Reese, does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
Sure. So, again, if you look at this graph, I talked about App Insights and Log Analytics. I think there are like two little sections on this this full graph. So the scope of what Azure Monitor has really expanded quite a bit. Key thing here, if you go from left to right across this diagram, it sort of describes what the process for monitoring really is. You have data sources that you either care about or you don't. You care about logs and activity from these resources or you don't. There's different types. You have your applications you're actually deploying. You have virtual machines or IaaS applications that you have on infrastructure as a service. So there's at least two levels of monitoring that you may be concerned about there. One is the virtual machine itself, how's it operating, what's the CPU, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have applications that you're running in the app itself. Could be standard off-the-shelf software, or it could be your custom apps or a combination therein, right? So, simple IaaS workloads itself could get quite complicated depending on what you're deploying and how you're deploying. Then infrastructure, there's been quite a bit of support added over the last several years for containers and Kubernetes, and there's some built-in connections so that you can start logging from Kubernetes. And again, this is similar, the Kubernetes space. Grafana and Prometheus are a couple of very popular services because there's built-in services that you plug into your Kubernetes, configure it, you're off and running, and you've got Grafana dashboards with logs and et cetera. A similar sort of thing is you're capable of doing in Azure Monitor these days. That wasn't the case initially. And then there's the Azure platform itself, which could be resources getting created, changes in resources, subscriptions, and tenants. And again, that's a lot of the things that we were concerned about when we were provisioning resources for this customer with Terraform, was making sure that they could detect, hey, if somebody makes a change to a resource, I want to be able to see. And if it's a change to a resource, like if it changes the firewall rules, I want to send the alarm bells and the klaxons start going off because, oh no, somebody changed the firewall, right? So,
Isn't that done automatically by Azure?
I'm sorry,
That's not done automatically by Azure?
what?
Resource change logging?
Yes, it is.
So it is automatic.
And now the question is, what are you going to do with that logging? Right? So the logging is automatic, it's built in. So that's the source. And then those log events get fed into Azure Monitor. And now you have the choice of what do I want to do with that log, right? Do I want to just archive it for historical purposes? Do I want to pass it on to a third-party service like Splunk, where I've set up alerts? Do I do some pre-aggregation with queries or whatever? It's like, hey, there could be 1,000 firewall changes a month. I don't know which ones are important. Send me every day the specific firewall changes, out the door to Splunk. So again, Splunk costs money too. So based on the number of log events that you have, so you can have what this allows you to do is have sort of a tiered structure for your largest enterprises that makes sense to them, right? So native in Azure, I've got Monitor or Log Analytics or whatever, and then that elevates into Splunk. And there's probably different people using these tools as well, which you have to think about, right? So the DevOps team or the dev teams or the operations teams are more likely to be configuring using managing Monitor, whereas let's say a security team or enterprise security team or whatever the heck it might be cross enterprise is really responsible for Splunk, and they're not dealing with Azure. They're also taking events from Google or AWS or on-prem private cloud instances that you're going to have in any big enterprise.
So just a clarifier. So it sounds like, Azure Monitor's gathering everything all the time. You get really good access to data.
Yeah.
But then it's more on the plan side that you have to say, well, what do I care about in that data? And
Correct.
then the alerting will be the piece behind that. So
Correct.
you might have rich data up front, but it could be white noise until you actually go through the plan of what's important and then how do I want to.
Correct, exactly. Then the other sort of element to that is how long do I need that data in Monitor? We talked about two application insights and log analytics. And again, it's a convenient way to think about this because application insights are really metrics or measures that are coming off of your system, CPU usage or things like that, measures, numbers. Whereas logs are events. Measures, they're only going to be around for days. And if you're in premium plans and et cetera, you can keep them around. I think the max is 90 days. So that's the most you're ever going to get out of the measure. And then logs, they're going to be expensive to keep around for a long time because your volume builds up and so on and so forth. So that other consideration is how long do I really need this in Azure Monitor? I need it so that I can get some insights, whether I have a visual check of how have I been operating for the last week or the last couple of weeks or whatever, and that's good enough for me because if it's been operating good for a week, I assume it was operating well for the week prior. I don't really care about that anymore, right? So it's just sort of this rolling window. And if it's logs, the thing I'm going to care most about are those events and potentially aggregating the events. And again, what is being included? I might have dashboards, or they're throwing Power BI in here, Grafana. Taking those logs in. I have some time period that I care about. Typically, it's not going to be over so much time. You have to be careful because there's security events and other things that you might need a longer window for. But that's part of your plan and your planning phases. How much log data do I need? Do I need a year's worth of log data? Do I need 2 years worth of log data? Some of our clients, different client, they have a requirement to store logs for, minimum of 2 years. Some log data they have to have for 5 years. That doesn't mean they have to do analytics queries. So when we set up the diagnostics that are part of the logging in Azure Monitor, we can have two sources. We can have one going to log analytics and another going, let's say, to a storage account. Where the storage account, I might have a different strategy for keeping track of those logs for 5 years and have a much larger volume. So those are some of the scenarios that I'll speak to. Yeah, sorry for the long-winded answer to your very simple question.
It was
very
great.
good question, Mitch. So again, there's a lot of stuff here. Certainly not going to talk about every icon on this pretty picture, but there, a couple of things we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. For those of us who are legacy and know what SCOM stands for, Microsoft has added support for SCOM, which is an on-premise System Center Operations Manager, on-premise monitoring logging tool that they now can feed up into the cloud to so that probably so they can stop investing in on-prem that can push it all to Azure Monitor or some such. Make it better for the customer. It's making it better for the customers. And you have the obligatory Power BI, et cetera. And then there are other sources other things that we can integrate with that become interesting. Like, for example, alerts that might get triggered. We can fire off logic apps or functions. We can feed data in from other sources, outside sources, third-party sources into this monitoring solution and do interesting stuff with it. Okay, I'll keep going. All right, so I think we've pretty much talked about this already. We think about the process, we want to plan it, what needs monitoring, who's notified, what are some SLAs that we might have. So do we have response time objectives or service level objectives that we want to make sure that we're keeping track of? What is our obligation? And then that can drive what it is we need to measure or monitor or log or et cetera. We're then going to configure, analyze, visualize, configure alerts, response, and then alert and respond, and then that critical fifth step of optimize cost. All right, so what was useful here? What are we actually using? Are we spending 3 times more than we thought we would? Yes. Might be 5 times more than you thought we would. That's just the way it works every time. Never fails. So then you look and say, all right, what am I actually using out of this? Do I tweak, refine, et cetera, trim down what I'm looking at, and then just keep cycling as things change, as your needs change. So configure. Actually, I can do that. We'll minimize. So I'm going to bop over to the portal here. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay on the slide and hit the escape key and go to browser, and we'll just go to portal.azure.com. And I'm going to navigate my way into a test resource group that I've got. So, firstly, monitor as a service. I can just click this and see all kinds of interesting things that potentially across my entire organization on monitor. But I can also just look at a resource group. And start to see things like resource visualizer, which is part of that group, and it's starting to show me things that are here. When I configure, I'm either configuring individual services. A key component of this is configuring a log analytics workspace, which is what I was actually trying to get to. So let me go back to the resource group. We'll go to the log analytics workspace. So when I created this workspace, it's basically sitting in a resource group somewhere. And it's up to me to determine what I'm going to use this workspace for and what the scope of that workspace is going to be. I can create a workspace for a given resource. I can create a workspace for a couple of resources, all resources in a resource group. I can create it at a subscription level. I can create it across subscriptions. So for resources across resource groups. So it's really a question of how I want to organize my metrics and what I'm looking for. When I configure a diagnostic for a particular resource, we'll take a look at this in a second. I'm sending those diagnostics to a particular resource group, but different resources can go into different workspaces, log analytics workspaces. So this can be quite a complex configuration. You can always change the rules, and the key point is that when you create your login or analytics workspace, it's sort of up to you to decide what you want to do, and that's going to change based on, similar to what we've talked about already. Who owns the data? What sort of data are you looking at? What sort of resources are you looking at? So, if you're a team that owns an application, you might create a log analytics workspace that's specific to your applications. It may be that the company that you're working for says, yeah, that's nice that you guys want your own log analytics, but I need you to send all your log analytics to a common workspace. And there are ways to set up roles and rights and privileges so that you as a team member can go inspect your resources and not inspect other people's resources. It can be done, but it may not be the best way to do it. There may be other ways that to satisfy those needs. And again, I've seen this in clients set up multiple ways where you have, I think every way. And in fact, one client I'm thinking of in particular, they tried different ways. Like, well, originally we thought we would have one log analytics workspace per resource group, and then you'd have one, all these workspaces all over the place. And then we decided, no, we're going to have one per subscription. And then we decided that wasn't good enough. We're going to have one for the entire stinking mess, which I don't think that's the right way to go. I do want to check back in on the client to see if they stuck with that approach, because I'm like, okay, if that's what you guys want to do, I don't think you're going to stay that way. I whispered to myself all the time, because that's a lot of data going to one place, and it's too much. But we'll see. We'll see what they ended up doing. But you can do that, right? You can have one log analytics workspace with all the stuff feeding it.
What's the default?
I'm sorry?
What's the default?
It's
When did it get created? Because I've never created a log analytics workspace explicitly in Azure, ever.
it's sort of one of the reasons why we're having this session is kind of take a step back,
Right.
let's look at monitor independently and talk about what it is.
Yes, this is why I came in here. I know I haven't done it.
No matter how, I'm sort of in the same boat. It's like I've used the services and whatever. It's like they added so much to it. It's like, yeah, let's take a step back and take a look at this for a minute. So as you enable and configure things, it'll create one by default. And then
It will create one by default.
Azure will create one by default.
When I do what?
When you, for example, turn on enable a metric, or try to create a rule, or turn on logging. Say, oh, you don't have a workspace, or do you want a new workspace? I'll go create one for you in some default group with some default name, like default workspace -quid -US West.
Yeah, like all of these.
Like all of those, right? And then again, what Grant is showing, which because we have an owl, you could see that on your video if you were paying attention. You can see all the workspaces that have been created, whether they're used or not. So it will get created by default. Once you have that ID, now you're going to go, configure services and specify that workspace. So that workspace by itself, unless it was created as part of configuring something else, doesn't have anything attached to it. It's just a workspace. Okay, I'm ready to receive your data.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Do activity logs go there?
they can.
That wasn't a helpful answer.
What? They can.
They can, but they don't by default.
You're not gonna see, you don't have to use a query to query your application, not by default. Ask me that question again, your activity log.
The activity logs. 'Cause
Yeah,
one of
the
them
activity
is
log, right, so,
the amount of time that my activity logs are good for, because the default is only 30 or 31 days.
yeah, so let's take a look at this. So you have that option. I don't know what I'm doing with my glasses. I don't want to look up there. I want to look down here. You can look up there. So let's do this. Let's go to portal.azure.com again. So we talked about this workspace. You can create it completely independently of everything else. You know, what Grant just showed was this log analytics workspaces. So these are all of them across our subscription. Hopefully you wrote that down quick so you know what all our workspace names are. Like, I don't know what you would do with that anyway, but whatever. So I want to look at the infamous, look at this resource group, for example, and I'll look at the activity log and see, you know, what's happened in this log. So I don't need log analytics to see this.
Right, and
This is just built in.
Right, it's built in, and this is rolling up all the activity logs for everything inside the resource group.
In that resource group. And then I can look at,
Great, I mean, that's a super nice feature.
yes. Now, because of, you know, by its own, you're getting, I can do an export. I can perhaps do some insights. Again, you have to be careful because with assuming too much, because as we spoke about earlier, there's a team at Microsoft that works on Azure Monitor and they keep throwing features out and you can get to this from here and that from there, and there's new windows and there's stuff happening all the time in the space because it's, you know, it's such a useful tool and et cetera. You know, again, Andrew was giving us a demo the other day of what he's done for a client. And it opens up the window. It's like, you know, they changed this or they changed that, right? So it's just the nature of the beast of these cloud services that they're always adding stuff in here. So anyway, back to your point, Grant, if I go to just logs, and, you know, now I'm actually going into where we're.
Right, the logs for the thing. Right.
Yeah, so I can look at app service and I can see the, you know, Azure activity, for example. And if I do a little bit of, do a little hover trick, and then I can use an editor just to save myself some typing, and I can now start to see Azure activity in.
Ah, so those are all the same ones.
So all the same stuff, but now it's in a Custo query. Or a Custo query.
So,
I don't know how it's pronounced. I don't know the way. I know a lot of useless trivia about some of these things, but I don't know if it's Jacques Cousteau or whatever. I think it's something else, Cousteau or maybe somebody knows the story, but you know, this is a very simple query, but I can then start to, you know, do some interesting things with this as well to you know, query, count, filter, you know, create a alert rule based on an aggregation that I might do or something like that with right. So I can export query rule, et cetera. So all these capabilities for processing the log, I'm not limited to just looking at what's in my activity log and exporting it. I now can use any of the monitor features to look at to process these things if I so desire. So that's kind of a cool thing.
it's almost like it gets stuck in two spots. Right, so you kind of have the local log, the activity log for whatever the services that you're using.
Yeah,
But then it also gets streamed over to your monitor stuff. And I can look at it there just as a regular query and
correct.
cross-reference it with other things if I want to.
Correct. Cross-reference it, again, export it or connect it to another third-party system like your SIEM tool or whatever.
Investigate that.
It's like, hey, somebody in some subscription somewhere, you know, created a resource that they shouldn't have been able to create. Let's go, you know, delete it for them or whatever,
Right.
you know, whatever the action is.
Yeah, okay, great. And this could be more than 30 days, where the other one is limited to 30 days.
If you're putting it into the logs, you can keep it for more than 30 days. Beware, because you'll start spending some real money.
Okay.
But, you know, if it's valuable to you, great. Or if, hey, I need it for 90 days and then I can get rid of it, or I need it for a year, then I can get rid of it. You know, do you have options? Is really what it comes down to. And Grant did a nice job of advancing us along here because
Problem filter.
Configure resources to use as workspace. I don't know, how did we get to 40 minutes into this? Did we start on time? Did I waste a lot of time up front,
No.
doing stuff?
Just talking.
There's a lot of talking.
It's a lot of stuff.
No wonder everybody's falling asleep because I'm talking too much. You gotta keep asking questions. Come on, people. So we configure resources. Let's go back to our friend the portal. So if I pick a resource, I can actually configure diagnostic settings for Azure Monitor or the log analytics, but that's a little too meta, so let's not do that. And why is that breadcrumb not bringing me back to the resource group? Yeah, I don't care. We're good. I don't need to say that. So let's go back to my resource group. Go to,
Just go to overview.
thank you.
Exciting.
Hey. So if let's pick a resource like this storage account, which I've actually already done earlier today or yesterday or whenever the heck I did it. I can go in and say, hey, I want to log data for this storage account for whatever reason, maybe I'm sure there's a reason. I'm not going to invent a scenario. You get it. There may be a reason I want to configure that. So I go into diagnostic settings for this specific resource, this specific storage account. I can go in here and I can say, hey, let's add a diagnostic setting. Forget that there's one there already. I can say at the storage account level, I want to know what all the transactions are, and I want to send that to a log analytics workspace. And now I have the option of picking any of the bazillion analytics workspaces that nobody even knows they created across the Azure or the IntelliTect Azure space. Or I can pick, the default that I created and then moved, which beware, because that'll screw you up if you move. It's again, when I created it initially, I created it in default workspace resource group. Thank you very much. 1, 2, 3 or whatever it was. I'm like, I don't like that. I'm going to move it to my test work resource group, and then you have to beware because that can break some of your connections, which is annoying as all heck. But just beware. So it's really handy for a demo. Getting connections broken, that's a joke. So I picked the specific resource group. So circling back to that question, right? Nothing gets added to this resource group by default. I go into the resource and provision it. Now, under normal circumstances, you're not going to do this by hand. You're going to be you don't do this by hand, I should say. You include that as part of your infrastructure as code, whether it's Terraform or Bicep or ARM templates or whatever, to say you agree, you plan, this is the log analytics workspace, you provision the log analytics workspace, grab that ID, and then use it as your provisioning resources to tie all those things in, so you're not doing this by hand. And assuming you want all those resources in the same log analytics workspace, right? The other interesting thing here, as part of that monitor, is I can also throw the stuff into a storage account, right? So I'm going to send it to log analytics, and then after I'm done using it, I can, delete it with impunity. If I need it for long-term storage, I can put it in a storage account, and then I can always take those logs and again send them to whatever log processing system I want to use to process them, scan them, whatever. Stream to an event hub, and then send them off to wherever the heck I want to go from Event Hub, which would be more real time. Or again, a somewhat recent invention is partner integration. So built right into the platform here is if I've got a third party like Splunk or Grafana, if I've configured a Grafana workspace, I can just say, hey, just send these to Grafana and don't store them anyplace else. I'm good. Okay. So that, you're not using all of the capability of Azure Monitor, but fine. You're also not paying for it, probably, right? So in those scenarios, it may come close to free, but again, you still have to be aware of the volume of data. Even if you're not storing it, you have to be aware of the volume of data. So if you're pumping a lot of data through, you may still pay. Okay, so we're just going to discard that because I already had, for those who are paying really close attention, I already had a diagnostic setting for storage account diagnostics.
In that case, if you're just using it as like a pipeline to get from point A to point B, Like if you want to use a different third party, is there a reason to go through Azure Monitor? Is there extra benefits that it's giving you, or is it just an easy way to integrate it?
Just an easy way to integrate it. The diagnostic setting, you're not gonna have to worry about writing your own APIs, which you could, right? And then depending on the third party, they will have pre-built connectors, right? So hey, go suck the data out of Azure and configure this, configure that. So it's your option at that point. But this, I can point click my way through getting it to a third party. Okay. Where was I going? Excellent question, Daniel. Thank you. What was I doing? Anybody remember what was in my head?
You're about to show us the diagnostic.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's what I was doing. You're good. So, we are looking at, if I look at, I'm not going to get into queries because heck, it's already 12:47. I have no idea how that happened. But you can see storage accounts here, and then if I go to storage blob logs, and do the little highlight trick, I can get to use it on my editor, and no, I can't. I'm just going to type it. Storage blob logs. I don't even know why I waste my time. And again, there's some handy dandy editing stuff there, but if that's all that's highlighted, I can run. And then see, earlier today, I uploaded some images to that blob storage, and I can see all of these, right? And then again, I've got the same capability. So those are standard services. And some of the fun stuff, let me just double check my slides here. Configure resources, configure apps. There's some built-in stuff. And then again, I can even do Azure AD. We're starting to look at log. What we're showing right now is Log Explorer with the custom query language and log queries. I think I can safely show you a query, an Uber query, just so you get an idea. So this, can you guys see that? So this is a query that is from one of our clients, which is actually taking web requests. Beware, that's old style syntax. There's newer style syntax. But bottom line is, hey, I'm getting web requests. If the web request failed, then I can actually do some filtering here, and it's not a couple of known fatal areas like Facebook crashes all the time. So if I get a crash from Facebook, I don't really care to be notified or alerted. And what's interesting about this is this alert or this query is being used to trigger alert to send an email to a dev to say, hey man, some critical error actually happened, right? Don't bother me if Facebook crashes, because that happens all the time. I can't do anything about it. Don't tell me if client height screwed up. But if it's anything else, I definitely need to know about it so I can go fix it. And as a result, again, we'll take a quick look at alerts because we are almost out of time. If I go to alerts, yes, unsaved. We can see that a test alert that I created earlier, which is just 400 errors because I have this stupid little website, and I just go in and say, what? And I do that like 3 times, and that's going to generate some 400 errors. And then I have this little monitor, which does a search query for the app service HTTP logs as opposed to request, which you just saw. That's the new name. Summarize, so I can do some aggregation here, count by the service, the service status, which is, whatever, 400 to, 401, 402, 200, et cetera, within an hour, and by resource ID. So I'm going to aggregate by the same resource ID. That's just the unique resources. So app service, if I have multiple different app services, I don't care if there's 400s. I don't want to aggregate them across resources. I want to aggregate them just for this website. And then if it's greater than 400, add a row to my query, and we can run that query, but trust me, it'll work because it's generating the alerts. and we're running out of time. But if there's rows in that query, it's going to trigger an alert. And then this is going to send me an email. So I've got probably 6 or 7 emails sitting in my inbox right now saying, hey man, somebody's firing 400s at your website, and maybe you want to do something about that. Real world scenarios that we've encountered. We hosted our own website on WordPress for a while. And, nice thing about, and in fact, I saw this in Andrew, who did a demo for us the other day. I saw the infamous XML RPC.php request, which is sent by rogue machines. I think what happens is you spin up a free machine in AWS, you load some software on it, and you start scanning the web, like every site on the web, to see if you can poke a hole in it and then phone home, right? So there are certain sites that are a little bit sophisticated. They detect, oh, this is WordPress. So now I'm going to go iterate through the entire Git repo of WordPress, because WordPress is open source. It's in a Git repo, and there's a whole bunch of PHP files. So what they do is they do a request. Can I get this file? Can I get that file? Can I get this file? And they will just hammer your site as fast as they can. It basically, it's a DDoS attack. So like, oh, here's a rogue IP. We've detected it. We wrote a query to detect when this happens, because you can look at the queries and see, all right, here's this pattern. We wrote a query. Let's find this pattern. Now I know what the IP addresses are. Now I can go put an IP blocker on it. Unfortunately, my intern who was doing this had to go get a real job or whatever, so he left us. But the next thing he had on his list was to automatically put in the IP blocking rule. And then the other thing happened is we did the sensible thing and let somebody else host our website. But it was fun, it was like, oh, hey, cool, look at it. It wasn't fun when our site was slowing down, but it was fun when we were like, oh, we're gonna nail this guy. So
I'm gonna step out. Nice job, Phil.
yeah, that is the overview. I think we got through everything. Alerts are cool. They get fired. You can be resolved by a user action. You can also set up alerts on metrics. Like if you have your CPU threshold, exceeds 60% or 70%, you can do an alert. You can do auto scaling, so you don't even have to write your own rules. You can say, when we hit this threshold, please scale my app service plan for me, which is effectively where you get CPU for the app service. And again, there's a lot of stuff that happens automatically in here. Interesting bits. So about this whole thing is getting an understanding of the application performance, alerting, and then being able to take corrective action. That's really, there's all kinds of interesting, hey, you can look at the log, et cetera, but this is what I find to be the interesting bits. Hopefully that makes sense. This is the demo that we're not going to have time for. I'm really sorry, Jenny. It's probably worth its own lunch and learn session, because there's a lot of cool stuff in here. What we, and by we I mean Jenny, did for one of our clients was we connected audit logs, GitHub's audit logs to an Azure Event Hub, connected that to a Stream Analytics job, connected that to a function app, which fed it into a log analytics workspace. Seems like a lot of extra bother, but that's effectively how you have to do it. Though I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Monitor adds some direct ingest from Event Hub. Right now they have outgoing, so you can pump events to Event Hub. They don't have a direct input from Event Hub or even Stream Analytics, which is we found surprising, but cold hard facts. But again, that was maybe 9 months ago. Who knows what's happened in the last 9 months? But that was certainly the state of the art 9 months or a year ago. A bunch of references that are in the deck. Of course, there's AI in Azure Monitor, which would also probably be a fun demo and explore. So, again, you look at logs, that you can generate a lot of logs. Looking for interesting things that happen in that logs can be interesting or a challenge, right? The DOS attack was fairly obvious, right? We did a couple of queries and we could see, oh yeah, we know what's going on, and now we know what the pattern is. We can look for a couple of key things that will occur in the requests, like Git, like a Git request, or the infamous XML RPC.php, which is a known vulnerability in WordPress. If you're not up to date, we can take a look at those requests and say, anybody who sends us one of those, they're rogue. So those are the easy cases. More interesting cases might be people who are more subtle. They're not using a blunt force instrument to find weaknesses. There's a, nice Once New blog, and again, this sort of illustrates the point of there's a bunch of stuff happening, May, July, June, May, and where's August? And maybe it's still coming 10 more. So, yeah, we're not gonna read all these. There's lots of stuff. So, you know what I mean?
So I have a question. So I guess, and I think you touched on it briefly, but is there any kind of strategy you can employ around the size of a log analytics workspace? Or is that kind of defined by the question you want to answer? Does it make sense to aggregate resources when you have a question that spans those?
Yes.
And just putting too much into one spot is just too much to dig through?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, right? Because if you want to aggregate together, yeah, I think it makes sense. Or if you have a group of resources, I think it makes sense. You're going to end up with a lot of data. But for example, the query that I showed you actually was from a couple of different resources, and it was actually pulling logs out of client side logs as well as server side logs, right? So it's not just the app service on the host, it's also client side, like the Facebook tracker. I mean, that's something that's going to blow up on your client, right? And if it blows up, we're reporting that up into Azure from the client. So, now it becomes the game of how do I, when is it too much to put in? And there, you can query, you can filter. So, it's not like you have to worry too much about how much data ends up in there. And I don't know that I would try to cost optimize, like, hey, I can put a, gig here and a gig there and a gig there to try to optimize my cost, because your time and, what you're going to get as a benefit at the end of the day is going to be way more than you're going to spend trying to do your own sort of cost optimization there.
Sure.
So, and again, we have, typically around for the projects that we're doing, we're going to have a workspace, whether we know it or not, that got spun up for a resource or a couple of resources, right? Because that'll happen by default in some of the pre-built scenarios, because there's templates, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, we have this client that as of a year ago had one workspace for all the subscriptions. I don't see how that is even feasible, but that was what they were doing.
Do you see it better to control, I guess, like, yeah, workspaces are spun up whether you know it or not. Is it better to try and control those, especially if you have things like infrastructure as code?
Yes.
Versus just let it happen and, try and figure it out later?
You want to take control.
Okay.
You want to take control. And again, the blessing and the curse, right? There's some easy template scenarios that are going to happen, but I think if you are, building something for real, as opposed to something you're playing with and screwing around with, and it's a prototype you're going to throw away, but it's actually something that's going to production. Absolutely, you want to be very specific about and intentional about what you're provisioning and how you're configuring.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And most likely you have all those variables set somewhere anyway, and you're feeding it into your infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
So you're saying connect to this specific workspace or whatever.
Yeah, so, you're not building all of your infrastructure as code with the hard-coded workspace ID,
Right.
today it's one, but tomorrow it's gonna be, maybe one per subscription or one per resource group.
Right.
So, you just plug in a different value, re-provision, everybody gets repointed, you're rock and roll.
Right.
So, all right, cool. That was a quick hour. Yikes.
Yeah. Thank
A lot of
you.
info. Very good.
Thank you. Thanks all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks,
Yeah,
Bill.
next month, GitHub rule sets.
Good job.
If you have rule sets that you want to share, let me know.